In the mid-19th century, the United States was a nation on the brink of collapse. What began as a bold experiment in democracy and freedom had become a fractured union, torn apart by deep-seated divisions. At the heart of this conflict lay one issue that refused to be ignored: slavery. It was not just a moral question but a fundamental clash of values, economies, and ways of life. This is the story of how America became two nations, locked in a brutal and bloody struggle that would reshape its destiny forever. The roots of the Civil War can be traced back to the stark differences between the North and the South. In the decades leading up to the conflict, the northern states had embraced industrialization. Factories, railroads, and bustling cities defined their landscape. Their economy thrived on innovation, wage labor, and a growing middle class. But in the South, life revolved around agriculture. Vast plantations stretched across the land, producing cotton, tobacco, and rice. And at the heart of this agricultural system was slavery, a practice that was not only economically vital but deeply ingrained in Southern culture. Interview clip: Historian. For the South, slavery wasn't just an economic institution, it was a way of life. They believed that without it, their entire social order would crumble. Meanwhile, the North saw slavery as morally repugnant and economically outdated. These conflicting views created an unbridgeable divide. But it wasn't just about slavery. The North and South also clashed over the role of the federal government. The South championed states' rights, arguing that individual states should have the power to govern themselves. The North, however, believed in a strong central government that could enforce national laws. These ideological differences set the stage for a conflict that would soon erupt into war. By the 1850s, political tensions had reached a fever pitch. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 allowed new territories to decide for themselves whether to permit slavery, sparking violent clashes known as Bleeding Kansas. Then came the Dred Scott decision in 1857, which declared that African Americans were not citizens and had no rights under the Constitution. For many Northerners, this was a step too far. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln, a relatively unknown lawyer from Illinois, emerged as the Republican Party's candidate for president. His platform opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories, though he did not initially call for its outright abolition. To the South, his election was seen as a direct threat to their way of life. As Lincoln prepared to take office, the nation stood on the edge of a precipice. Within weeks of Lincoln's election, 7 southern states, South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas, seceded from the Union. On February 4, 1861, they formed the Confederate States of America. With Jefferson Davis as their president, the Confederacy declared itself a sovereign nation, determined to preserve its independence and protect the institution of slavery. Interview clip: Historian. Secession was not just a political act, it was an emotional one. For the South, it was about preserving their identity, their culture, and their way of life. For the North, it was an act of rebellion that threatened the very existence of the United States. The war began on April 12, 1861, when Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor. For 34 hours, the fort was bombarded until Union forces were forced to surrender. This marked the beginning of a conflict that would last 4 long years and claim over 600,000 lives. Families were torn apart, brothers fought against brothers, and the nation was plunged into chaos. The Civil War was fought on multiple fronts, with battles raging across the country. At Antietam, the bloodiest single day in American history, Union forces halted a Confederate invasion of the North. At Gettysburg, General Robert E. Lee's army was decisively defeated, marking a turning point in the war. And in the West, Ulysses S. Grant's victories at Vicksburg and Chattanooga split the Confederacy in two. Interview clip: Military historian. These battles were not just military engagements, they were symbolic struggles for the soul of America. Each victory or defeat carried profound implications for the future of the nation. On January 1, 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that all enslaved people in Confederate territory were free. While it did not immediately end slavery everywhere, it transformed the war into a fight for human freedom. It also paved the way for African Americans to join the Union Army, further tipping the scales in favor of the North. The war ended on April 9, 1865, when General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. But peace came at a great cost. Over 600,000 Americans had lost their lives, and the South lay in ruins. Reconstruction began, but it was a difficult and often painful process. Millions of newly freed African Americans faced discrimination, violence, and poverty as they struggled to build new lives. The Civil War left an indelible mark on America. It ended slavery but did not erase racism or inequality. The struggle for true unity continues to this day. Yet, the war reminds us of the resilience of a nation willing to fight for its ideals. As Abraham Lincoln once said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." Today, we must remember the lessons of the past as we work toward a more perfect union. Closing quote, Abraham Lincoln. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds. Thank you for watching. History shapes our future.